Ya estamos en...
Perfecto. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Bienvenidos a todos a hoy, este día, a esta conferencia magistral que se hace en el marco del diplomado, del séptimo diplomado Taller Diseño de Jardines Sustentables a Escala Arquitectónica de la División de Educación Continua de la Facultad de Arquitectura. Mi nombre es Mónica Payares y es un gusto darles la bienvenida a esta sesión, a esta conferencia magistral. Siempre buscamos, como parte de los diplomados, tener una conferencia, un conferencista y hablar de los temas de actualidad. En este caso, tenemos unos invitados muy queridos que nos hablarán de la arquitectura de paisaje y de lo que se está haciendo en este tema en los Estados Unidos. Así es que a nombre de la División de Educación Continua, les doy la bienvenida a esta conferencia y es un gusto presentarles, bueno, la conferencia el día de hoy tiene el título de Arquitectura de Paisaje en el Medio Oeste de los Estados Unidos y tenemos pues unos invitados de lujo. Tenemos a la conferencista Carisa McMullen, quien es una arquitecta de paisaje que está en Kansas City y que ella es la directora de Landworks y fundadora de Landworks Studio. Eh, pues con una gran trayectoria, su despacho ya cumpliendo 25 años, con mucha experiencia y bueno, nos va a hablar de cuál ha sido su trabajo. Ella además ha ocupado posiciones, bueno, su pasión también por la profesión la ha llevado al voluntariado, como es el caso de participar en el Consejo de Juntas de Registro de Arquitectos de Paisaje en Estados Unidos. Esto es la organización que se encarga de regular el tema del registro de los participantes eh, en Estados Unidos, de los arquitectos de paisaje. Y también tenemos de su despacho de Landworks a dos de sus colaboradores, Brian Storm, quien es pues también 20 años de experiencia en temas de diseño de paisaje, de planeación, de cuestiones urbanas, y tenemos a Erika Flatt, también de su despacho, con 14 años de experiencia trabajando en temas, en sectores multidisciplinarios, y bueno, ellos nos hablarán de toda esta experiencia, de todo el trabajo que hacen, y además me encanta la idea de que Carisa invite a su equipo de trabajo, lo cual pues nos habla mucho de ella como profesional. Les doy la bienvenida. Esta conferencia será en inglés, trataremos de en algún momento intercambiar inglés-español, y bueno, espero que en YouTube les permita contar con la activación de subtítulos. Carisa, welcome, welcome Brian, welcome Erika. It's really an honor here at the National University of Mexico, at this department of the Faculty of Architecture, that it's continuous education, and of this course that it's a course focused on the sustainable design of gardens, and we have here our students of this course. And as I have mentioned in this presentation, we used to have a keynote speaker, an interesting conference to talk about the projects that actually are developed in other places, related, especially related, for example, of what you do at Landworks, that you work with the community and you work also with this emphasis on sustainability. So I just did the presentation, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the Continuous Education Department of the Faculty of Architecture. And well, you're welcome, and please go ahead with this presentation, this very interesting presentation. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Monica. Let's see. If you'll humor me a second, I will. Sure. Buenos tardes. Mi nombre es Carisa. Mi equipo y yo estamos felices de estar con ustedes. So, thought I would give it a try. I'm going to share my screen here. make sure you're seeing the full presentation.
Yes.
So you might guess that I've had a little experience with Duolingo. I was using this app after I traveled from Mexico City about a year ago and found that my family, my friends, my colleagues have found this a good way to get a little more comfortable with another language. I don't know if you've met Duo. He's a cute owl that shares information, and I took a screenshot in one of my lessons, and you can see that I have learned that students need t-shirts and pants, and I think that's a very, very valuable piece of information. And I can only take away from that shoes are optional. So I know Monica introduced us. My name is Carisa McMullen. I've been practicing for 32 years in landscape architecture, started in the public sector and then navigated over working with architects and engineers before I realized that I just really wanted a little more control over the projects and the messaging that landscape architects bring to our clients. And I'm very appreciative that two of my project managers in our office, Erica and Brian, are able to join me tonight to talk in more detail about some of the projects that they have worked on here and completed or are completing. Brian's been with me 7 years and Erica's been with me 6 years. So I very much appreciate their time and their effort tonight. I also wanted to give a shout out to you, Monica. It's been a pleasure getting to know you over the last several years. We met as Monica participates on the CLARB board, the Council of Landscape Architecture Registration Boards, and she's a valuable asset to the team. She and I in 2023 were able to share a stage here in a proclamation that there was a commitment to recognize the practice of landscape architecture at your university, understanding that you're currently working in the structure of more architecture labels, but doing the great work that landscape architects do. I've had the opportunity to have many meals with Monica. I've heard her speak multiple times, and it's always a pleasure. I am also the recipient of some of her artwork. I have it nicely framed and proudly displayed on my fireplace at home. So thank you, Monica, for bringing us in. I think also it's important to note for World Landscape Architecture Month here in April, Monica assisted our office in doing some promotion on the work that you are doing. So it was my turn to reciprocate. So as I mentioned with CLARB, Monica facilitated a visit to your university. I don't know if I had the opportunity to meet some of you, but it was a very impressive tour with the faculty and the students. We learned a lot. We were able to go through the studio and talk with students and see projects that were being worked on, and it was impressive work. There wasn't a single one of us that left our visit and not impressed with the work that the students are doing and what the faculty is teaching relative to landscape architecture. We visited many places. I'm not going to share all of them, but the botanical garden was a treat. But very impressive was the plant materials that you have dried and categorized in the library that you have access to for learning. I found this most curious. This is not something I have ever seen before, but it's in a prominent place on your university. I can assume that it's lighting. And I think it reminds me of something maybe I would see in Star Wars or something. But as I mentioned, we stayed in Coyoacan as part of our trip. And I was just very impressed. I thought it might be worth just taking a few minutes to share my experiences in some of the places that maybe you've spent some time and share some of those reflections with you as well. The public spaces in what I might equivalent Coyoacan to as a suburb of Mexico City, like where our office is located now. But the public spaces were fantastic. But the particular attention and detail to the private garden spaces as we walked around the community was equally impressive. I loved the street experience, the ability to get a coffee in the morning and people watch and visit, and equally, maybe grab a beer at the end of our day as well. A couple of things that stood out to me in my time here was you could see a picture here of all of the utilities given the age of the community compared to some of our suburbs here, where many communities are working. If they don't have their utilities underground, they're working to put their utilities underground. It protects them from the weather with a lot less outages, and of course removes some of the visual impact that those have. I understand, many communities don't have the ability to do that even here. But it was an impressive amount of infrastructure, I will say. And then additionally, I thought it was very impressive that there was an intersection that was in pretty tough shape navigating the sidewalk. And in the amount of time we were there, which was just maybe a day or two, the broken pieces were removed and new concrete was poured and replaced to make the community a little more accessible to pedestrians on the sidewalk. Here, our Congress in 1990 passed the Americans with Disabilities Act to make sure that our projects, new and any renovation projects, don't discriminate against individuals who may have disabilities. So a lot of our work, in addition to sustainability, focuses on making sure that our public places are accessible to everybody. We took the liberty of spending a couple of extra days to spend time in Mexico City. Again, very impressed with the park spaces, the markets, the architecture, but really focused on the placemaking that happens in Mexico City, very similar to what we do here in the United States, making the streetscape environment a place where people want to hang out and meet people. You had opportunities where you were reclaiming some of this the street area here with this chalked to a more of a pedestrian environment. We too are doing some of those same things. What I found most surprising was the mode of transportation using the gondolas, getting people from their homes to their places of work. It makes perfect sense given the amount of vehicles that you have on your roadways and the time that's spent traveling. Public transit is something that's being discussed a lot here in Kansas City. We have now, we're moving on our second phase of a streetcar. It mostly gets people in the very dense areas to destination points. The second expansion will reach college students and get them to the river. But we have a long way to go to be able to say that our public transportation is successful in getting a majority of people to places without their private cars. This was just an absolute treat. Monica facilitated this. We were able to visit Xochimilco with the designer himself. Mario was gracious and took us on a tour. It happened to be the same year that the American Society of Landscape Architects designated this place with the Landmark Award. It's a World Heritage Place, of course, UNESCO. So the idea that we got to see this and hear from the designer, the architect who made this place so important for people, especially after seeing the congestion, all of the hustle and the bustle of Mexico City, understanding just how important these green spaces are and how much they're valued, making sure that even with the pedestrian bridge that people can access it regardless of how much traffic is on the traffic way. I was also really impressed with the preservation, well, the ingenuity of the chinampas and then the preservation of those, how you can reclaim the property from the water and produce a place that grows vegetation. So where are we? We are considered Midwesterners. We're located Here we do our work in the Midwest, located between Kansas and Missouri here. As Midwesterners, we pride ourselves on being very practical. We're not the first to adopt trends. People on the West Coast, people on the East Coast, they're usually doing more cutting edge things. We play it pretty safe here and wait until there's tried and true methods. Our office is located here. Specifically, it's Olathe, Kansas. The town founder, John Barton, he was an Indian agent. He was just in awe of the magnificence of the prairie and the wildflowers that he saw when he got here. So he asked one of his Shawnee Indian friends what the native word for beautiful was, and that is Olathe. So Olathe, it means beautiful in the Native American Shawnee language. Because we straddle both the Kansas and the Missouri state lines, we're licensed in both Kansas and in Missouri. And the shaded area shows the general area that we do our work. We do like to say that we stay within a 3-hour driving radius, and that is about 500 kilometers, give or take, given our traffic patterns and our roadway system. We've got projects out in western Kansas here. We don't quite go to St. Louis, the metropolitan area. We have a project in Oklahoma and in Arkansas, and we've done a couple in Nebraska as well. But we focus primarily in this 3-hour driving radius because we like to have hands-on interaction with the communities where we are. We like to do the site analysis with our boots on the ground, and we really like to have that relationship and see the project when it's finished. So I thought it might be fun to just show the rest of our studio and how and where we do our work. In 2017, I was able to purchase the building that you see standing behind us with the awning. Olathe is in the process of revitalizing its downtown, like a lot of suburbs are in our metro area. We renovated the second floor up top for our offices, and then I was able to attract a couple of tenants. So we have from offices to more retail and commercial. So right below me is a pastry shop, which smells fabulous in the mornings when the pastries are baking. And then around the corner, we were able to add a wine shop. So we've got coffee in the morning, we've got wine in the evening, we've got everything covered. But I love the fact that we are in a walkable area, and we have a very creative space to do our work. We like to talk about leading the development of exceptional places, and I like to use the word leading because we've found that we like working with architects, we like working with engineers, but landscape architects lead projects differently. And so the more we can lead, the more influence we can have on the conversations that we can engage in the community with, and then the overall product. We focus on elevating, engaging, and inspiring. And that's not just the users of the spaces when we're finished, although they're our primary focus, but we want to make sure that our clients understand and appreciate the landscape architect's perspective, our point of view as we're walking through these projects as well. We talk about memorable places because when we all sat around and thought about outdoor spaces and why we're in the field that we're in, we can appreciate that some of our best memories we made when we were outside. And so the fact that we get to influence the next generation of people and the memories that they have outside and what their experiences are is really valuable to us. So to walk through some of the projects, I just want to share the breadth of the work that we do, because we like to stay as diverse as possible, have the influence as many places as possible. The more diverse we are, the more people we impact with landscape architecture. So this is a smattering. We like to say our services include transportation and streetscapes. We do commercial and mixed use, parks and recreation. We do signage and wayfinding. We have an opportunity in that genre to educate. We can do environmental education panels and really establish the character of a community through some of the signage and wayfinding that we do. Of course, our projects include public engagement, and sometimes that includes branding as we're doing planning documents and those kinds of things. So when we're looking at systems wide, which we do some of in that planning realm, we're really looking at all of the green spaces and parks that make up a community and looking at where the deficiencies are and where we can influence better outdoor spaces. A little more specifically, we do support architects and engineers, and we have a great group of people that rely on us to bring our expertise to the projects. We appreciate our relationships with them and their approaches. We've found groups that think similarly to us and really value what we bring to the table. So we work on larger transportation projects that you see here, where we're bringing art into this roundabout, but really influencing the paving patterns and the plant materials and what that experience is like. We assist, bridge engineers with the bridge aesthetics, bringing elements that were maybe historic from the community. These lanterns on the columns on this bridge were something that was representative of something that had happened in this community's history, and we were able to celebrate that on the bridge. And then we work to make sure that the experiences that people have as they enter architecture, whether it's at their building or their residence, that their first impression of that space is really a place that they want to be. As far as work environments, this is a fire pit. It looks like it might be somewhere in a park, but this is actually in a corporate office park. So this space becomes active during the lunchtime or after hours. If a company wants to host an event or bring their clients, they're able to do that on the grounds of their office park. Of course, we love parks. We love playgrounds. It gets very competitive in that space because I think every landscape architect wants to really impact how kids and people interact with the environment. We are seeing a lot of pools being converted to splash pads, and I know there is concern among communities of making sure that their residents are able to learn to swim, but many pools were built and are more than 50 years old, in some cases 75 years old, and the infrastructure is failing, and communities just don't have the resources to be able to build new pools in every instance, nor do they have the ability to maintain or staff some of the pools with the lifeguards and the expertise that are required to keep them safe. So in those cases, we're able to convert the pools and provide a water experience in more of a splash pad environment that can be come and go. And lastly, we do some stormwater management projects. We're brought in to ensure that we're protecting our soils from erosion, from keeping the soil from silting in the waterways and the streams and the creeks that we have here. We're capturing the runoff and we're using it in ways that are productive, and that we really think about stormwater not as something that has to be dealt with, but how can it be celebrated as an amenity in some form or fashion within some of these communities. We're able to filter, in the bottom image, we're filtering water off of a parking lot. This is a trailhead to a bike trail system. We can capture it in the bioswale and filter it out before it even gets anywhere close to the creek. The top image is actually a downtown area with a streetscape, and it's just fascinating that we were able to put in some curb cuts the way the grades worked, and we had a client that really wanted to capture that storm water, and we were able to create these really nice sitting areas with some nice plant materials utilizing the storm water that's captured. And as we've grown, this is our 25th year. You can see that logo up here on this slide. We're able to impact more communities, larger spaces, and really then have an influence on more people. I know Monica is a baseball fan. I don't know if we have any football fans in the audience, but if you know the Kansas City Chiefs, they've had some good successful runs. I'm not a particular fan, but I will say we had the opportunity to work with Patrick Mahomes and his foundation and build a playground in a community that really needed something for the kids to play. So if you know football, then you might recognize Patrick Mahomes in that image. And the great part about this, we celebrated the history of Martin Luther King, and we also were able to become a catalyst. The community came out and spoke, and they said the playground is wonderful, and we will look forward to that, but we need access to the park from where we live. There's other infrastructure improvements that they really saw as more important to them. And to the city's credit, they stepped up and are now in phases of taking care of some of those other issues as well. So this wouldn't be a class if there weren't some learning objectives. So I want to share a little bit here about how we interpret our Midwest landscapes. What does Midwest landscapes mean to us? And then we're going to go through 3 case studies where we talk specifically about 3 projects, focusing on some of our sustainability practices, our ADA, our accessibility best practices, and then we'll roll in there how we engage with the community and what we do with that information. So as I was thinking about this, it was really helpful for me to understand how does our city of Kansas City, Missouri relate to Mexico City. And then after I had this information put together, I thought this might be just as useful for you all as well. So comparing the size, Kansas City, Missouri is about half the size of Mexico City. Mexico City has 9.2 million people. Kansas City, Missouri has 512,000. And that is in the actual city limits of Kansas City, Missouri. When we include the suburbs or the outer areas, I understand Mexico City has about 21 million people. And we have 2.2 million. Mexico City is the largest city in Mexico. Kansas City is the largest city in Missouri. It's only the 3rd largest city in the state of Kansas and only the 38th largest city in the United States. So I also thought it was interesting to compare just how far apart our plant hardiness zones are based on the USDA's mapping. And I know that there are microclimates everywhere, so there's a lot of different numbers that we can use, but generally we're a few degrees away from your hardiness zone. I will say when I graduated from college, which doesn't seem like it was that long ago, our plant hardiness zones were included 4, 5, and 6, not as much 6, but as things change, we don't have hardly any hardiness zone in the 4 area. And then rainfall is another big difference. You have almost 69 centimeters of rainfall a year, and we have almost double that. So here's a map that shows our hardiness zones. You can see here, there's just a tiny bit of blue up here at the corner of Kansas, but we're mostly green in that 6A, 6B area. So oftentimes when I talk to folks who haven't been to Kansas, they may live in the United States, but they've never been to Kansas. After talking with them a little bit, I get the sense that this is the image they have of the way we live here in Kansas. And we do have a lot of Western history that we celebrate. Olathe has one of the stops on the Santa Fe Trail was here. We take great pride in the westward expansion, and we have 3 different trails that were pretty significant as folks were traveling from the East Coast to find their treasures and gold out west. We have a lot of frontier military encampments that we talk about, that we preserve, that we share in our outdoor spaces. There are missionaries that traveled through here as well. When you travel through the landscape, you may see a headstone here or there. A lot of people died of cholera as they were traveling across the state, so there are many small cemeteries that still exist. So while we're not riding horseback to work, we do have various landscapes that we are able to influence. And we stretch from the very rural, mostly on the western edge of that shaded area, to the east, to the more populated. So I thought it would be helpful to put into context, where our projects are and how we treat those projects. So on the western edge, we have the Tallgrass Prairie Reserve, and it is a beautiful place. You can see that we have access to absolutely gorgeous sunsets, very blessed there. And the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve has about 11,000 acres of grassland, when once the prairies covered about 170 million acres in North America. Today, there's only about 4% of that that's intact, and a lot of it is here at our Tallgrass Prairie. So we work in these rural communities that are on the outskirts of some of these really nice open spaces. And there's a lot of strengths in working in these communities. They have a lot of nature, they have a lot of open space, and they appreciate the open space that they have. We're able to do some small improvements that really are big and impactful to the communities that are there. When we work in these rural communities, we almost always get really valuable and genuine engagement from folks, and they just appreciate so much our abilities that we can bring. Some of the challenges in working in these rural communities are they have very limited resources. With a very small population, they don't generate a whole lot of revenue. And so we have to do as much as we can with as little as they have. Education is always important when we're working in these rural communities. They don't necessarily have the resources or understand design from our standpoint. And so we educate them and bring them along on why we do some of the things that we do and why it's important. And then we keep things very simple. You can see in this archway here in Iola, Kansas, that there aren't any plant materials that are included. Our work was listening to the community and developing a branding around who they are and where they want to be, and then giving them pride in this trail system that they've been developing that connects not just through their community, but connects to a statewide trail system that brings in tourists and revenue in that way. So then we'll move from those rural communities to our suburban communities. They're largely made up of these single family homes. There's schools. We have commercial and retail that's focused at key intersections. And then nice public parks and infrastructure. As you can see here, this is one of the large pools and parks in our community here in Olathe. It has ball fields and trails and the swimming pool, playground, a fishing pond. And as I mentioned, each one of these suburban communities has downtowns that are revitalizing, trying to capture residents, bringing housing back to downtowns, and really creating places for people to recreate. So here are an example of some of the projects that we work on in the suburban neighborhoods. We work on corporate buildings and corporate office parks. We work on parks, we work on trails, we work on signage. We work on traffic and infrastructure improvements. And we have the opportunity sometimes to include public art and work with artists. So it's interesting, we have a metropolitan organization that is really an umbrella for all of the suburbs that we have in the Kansas City area. And I was surprised even to look up, we have 119 cities that are included in our metropolitan planning organization. Most of the cities have between 65,000 and 200,000 people in them. Olathe happens to have about 150,000 people. So there are a lot of different government entities that we learn to work with and agencies that do things very differently because all of these communities do operate under different structures. So that's one of the challenges that we have in working with these communities is understanding how they operate and what they appreciate. We also struggle a little bit in the suburbs because our engagement can be, we want this, but I don't want it in my neighborhood, or I don't want it in my backyard or near my backyard. So there's a little bit of that has to happen as people are very protective of their suburban environments. But the strengths are they have resources. Oftentimes around here, they have resources. They have maintenance staff that can take good care of the gardens that we create in the outdoor spaces. We have room to work. There's a lot of green fields that are undeveloped, which also means that we can influence in positive ways how that planning happens. We can prevent them from making some poor choices with some of the open space that they have. Our suburban clients, they appreciate quality. And I think one of the things that we really like is they're very competitive. So when one suburban community has something that everybody in the metro is talking about, then a majority of the other suburban communities are trying to figure out how do we get that? How can we have something like that? So some of the projects here, you can see some of the signage that we've created. We've got some small parks, we've got some larger parks, we've got our corporate office park. And this bottom image is an area that is documenting some of the history that happened on this property. It happens to be outside our window. So we appreciate that we can look out and see some of the work that we've impacted every day. And then, of course, we have our urban environment. This picture was taken from the Liberty Memorial, which is a National World War I memorial. It brings people from all over. The beautiful lawn, what you see in the mid-ground there is Union Station, where all of the trains used to come in and out. And it's a beautifully renovated structure that stays very busy. I do believe there are some bullet holes on the sides of these buildings. There's stories that can be told if you take a tour in Kansas City because the mafia was here from Chicago, New York, and even in Kansas City. So there's some pretty fun stories from the history in Kansas City. The skyline is iconic for those of us here in the Midwest. It's a beautiful skyline. The Western Auto sign lights up at night and everybody uses that as a landmark, as well as there's art that adorns one of the big bridges near the Performing Arts Center that gets recognized very, very often. Our projects in the urban environment range from multifamily housing. Again, this is the playground that we did with the Mahomes Foundation. We have the opportunity to work on large performing arts venues and document some history and create some really great places or revitalize some really great places. Some of the challenges that we have in working in the urban environment is there is a lot of competition for the resources that exist. So it always seems like there's never quite enough to do what we want to do on the projects. And we have to be very careful to consider vandalism. We have to think about vandalism and making our places vandalism resistant and using crime prevention principles to make sure that the public who's using our spaces stay safe. Engagement in our urban projects is a little challenging too. There's a lot of competition for people's time. And we have a lot of disenchanted citizens, maybe who were promised things in the past with other projects or those kinds of things and didn't really see anything realized. So don't feel like their opinions are as valued when it comes to some of the parks. We deal with challenging sites in the urban environment and some challenging infrastructure. We have a lot of mature trees, though, which is wonderful to work with. And sometimes we're able to utilize some of historic structures or something that was built in a previous era, like Brian did in this splash park picture, where a building that was on this park property was converted and is now a beautiful shelter. So with that context, I'm going to turn it over to Erica and have her present her project that she's in the middle of right now.
Thank you, Carissa. Buenas tardes, everyone. So let's talk about the newest park in Overland Park, Kansas, which is one of the suburbs of Kansas City. It is named in honor of their sister city that is in Germany. It's called Bietenheim-Bissingen Park, and we call it BB because it is much easier to pronounce. Overland Park established a sister city relationship with BB Germany in 1999, and it began with an exchange involving BB and one of Overland Park's high schools, Shawnee Mission South. They had music and orchestra programs. So since then, Overland Park and German officials have been working together to establish economic development opportunities between the two communities, in addition to furthering cultural and educational ties. Next slide. So our park site is right in the middle of, it's the non-colored parcel. It was undeveloped. It's located in the southern part of Overland Park, but as you can see, it's surrounded by pretty large single family residential neighborhoods and also some larger estate-like properties. There is a pretty consistent 5% slope that falls from the northwest corner down to the southeast, and it falls into a creek, which is a designated streamway corridor that falls along the eastern edge. Next. And so I have a few photos showing what the site looked like before construction started. This is looking to the east. So we're looking downhill, and you can see how there's the gradual slope all the way to the edge of the property. You can see the residential on the north side and then the road on the south. Next, please. And then this photo is looking west, uphill. And this is also looking west, but we just want to show some of the existing trees and vegetation that was on site. We worked closely with the city's forester to determine which trees we should make a real effort at trying to save and incorporate into the overall design. In the end, I think we really only saved maybe 5 trees that were good specimen trees and really worked with our design. Next. And then this last photo is looking north, and we are on the east side of the property. So all that vegetation, that is the streamway corridor. The designated corridor is actually about 100 feet wide, but the stream is really only like a 5-foot wide creek. So it's kind of silly to call it a stream, but that is what the city designates it as. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So this slide is showing some of the inspirational imagery that we collected early on just to begin thinking about how do we tie this park back to BB in Germany? And how can we pay homage to the sister city without it being a complete replica? So we studied a lot of aerial views of the central district's city grid. That's the photo on the left. So you can see it's not really laid out in any sort of pattern. It's all kind of pieced together. There's no symmetry there, but we studied a lot of these aerial views. They also have a lot of park districts and luscious landscapes, and then a lot of different types of architectural features and materials. And ultimately, our park concept, I think, did a really nice job of incorporating these architectural and cultural inspirations from the sister city. Next. So public engagement began in 2023, generally between April and June of that year. The first engagement was focused on the adjacent neighborhoods and residents, just because they hadn't had a park space in their backyard for so long. So this was going to be quite an adjustment for them. And we really wanted them to feel that their input mattered throughout this whole process. And we took it very seriously, and they were very involved from day one all the way through when plans were approved by City Council. This was the last public meeting that we had, and we showed two concepts that we had developed over time, including getting city feedback and feedback from our park steering committee. Generally, the amenities were the same, but we had two pretty different layouts to show, and we asked the residents what they liked and didn't like about each concept, and they wrote it down on the boards, and we did the same for the architectural styles as well. And this is showing the the final concept. So we took all of that feedback, finalized the plan, included all of the different park amenities that were preferred among the residents. So the amenities that were included in this plan was a small parking lot, an area for yard games, two gazebo shade structures, a restroom combined with a shelter, a sloped boardwalk through the streamway corridor, a playground, a loop multi-use trail with connections to the north neighborhood, and then also to the existing sidewalks along the streets. An interactive water feature, an entry plaza, synthetic turf bocce ball courts, a reading nook with an opportunity for public art, limestone slab walls and terraces, kind of as the site steps down that grade, a tree bosque, lush landscape, and interpretive signage throughout. One item that was added later on in the process was an underground cistern that we are going to capture rainwater to use for irrigation purposes, just to try to bring in some sustainability to a previously undeveloped site. Next. And the next few slides, we're going to show some renderings that we created for just visualization purposes. We find that 3D renderings have been a really great tool to show people that might not be used to looking at plan graphics, but this is looking from the southeast corner of the site up. Next. And then this view is a little bit towards the center of the park, looking at the bocce ball courts. You can see the yard game area along with the playground and shelter and restroom. And then one of the gazebos we located in the center of the park, and we had considered including a labyrinth in the design. That got a little complicated, so instead of that, we decided to create a really beautiful garden space central to the gazebo. Next. And then this is a view of the reading nook that's situated within the tree bosque. It offers a space away from all of the craziness that might occur with water and playgrounds and games. There will be a public art piece that is being developed by an artist from Germany that will be installed later this year. And then this image is our other gazebo that really, we tried to make the streamway corridor more of an amenity. And even though we had to stay out of it, we tried to get as close as possible. So it would seem like more of the park space. Okay. In this slide, the light green areas are showing where we indicated we would install a lot of plant material other than turf grass. And then the dark green area is showing the full width of the stream bank corridor, which again, we were directed by city code and officials to stay out of as much as possible, not to disturb that area. Again, even though the actual creek is very small compared to how wide the corridor is. The thumbnails on the right show the different trees and shrubs, perennials, and grasses that we included in the plan. In addition to creating a lot of different seasonal interests with ornamentals, we try to use some natives as well. Next. So now we're getting to the exciting stuff. Last August, we had a groundbreaking. It was really well attended. It was a great day. We had a Zoom portal that allowed representatives from Germany to participate virtually, even though there was an 8-hour time difference. I think they were maybe watching soccer at this time, but that's all right. The mayor and the artist that is providing the artwork for the park, they were on the call. And here are some photos of the construction progress. We were out on site last week, so the 3 of the smaller photos are pretty recent. You can see the shade structures being constructed along with their walls. All the limestone slabs have been installed. And I believe all of the concrete sidewalk has been installed as well. The photo on the right is from a little bit earlier in the year, but you can see how the site is beginning to kind of take shape, and you can see the trees that were saved and incorporated into the design. And this slide, okay, so I said we were going to come back to the streamway corridor, and as you can see, this elevated boardwalk, the contractor required a lot more site work to get it installed, so we ended up disturbing a lot of the corridor. And you can also see on the photo on the top left that we ran into some drainage problems. So by the time the boardwalk was installed, the contractor graded the site, we had to change up our plant palette over in this area just because the soil conditions were a lot different than what we had originally expected. But we were able to switch out some trees for ones that could tolerate a more wet environment. And we are going to plant a mesic style prairie that can take the dry conditions along with some wet. It's mostly short grass with some wildflowers in it. So I think that will be really nice and create a lot more interest other than just having turf grass there. And lastly, we are really looking forward to this being completed in September of this year. It will be a powerful symbol of international collaboration that will really enrich Overland Park's community. It will spark creativity and it will foster meaningful connections. So the website on the bottom, if you want to learn more about it. The city is really great about updating their photos. So check it out sometime. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica, and thanks again to Monica and your department, your students, the university. This is a great opportunity, and we're really thankful to be able to speak with you about these projects. My name's Brian Sturm, and like Carissa said, I've had the opportunity to work at Landwork Studio for the last 7 years. I've been practicing for about 20 now, and almost all of that's been in Kansas, in the Kansas City area. I'm going to be talking about a project that our office got to work on and complete about 5 years ago. It has a long and cumbersome name. The Delmar Lane and Fontana Avenue low water crossing improvements. In our office, we usually refer to this project as Delmar and Fontana. Those are the two main streets that sort of traveled through this project. But as the next slide will show, really the project was about water and about these sort of curious concrete channels that when the project began, traveled through this small neighborhood in a suburb of Kansas City known as Prairie Village. This project is a bit of a chimera. It had both the elements of a stormwater mitigation and project associated with best management practices, or a BMP, to help better manage stormwater. But as you'll come to see, it really also had a lot to do with residential design and really garden design on either side of these channels. So there were about 390 meters of concrete flume, just like this, that this project ended up replacing. That was important work, as you'll see really on the next slide. These concrete flumes crossed both of the streets that I mentioned earlier, Delmar Lane and Fontana Avenue. These low water crossings, perhaps when the neighborhood was first developed over 60 years ago, maybe didn't pose that much of a hindrance. But over time, this neighborhood and other neighborhoods upstream, so to speak, have completely filled in this region of landscape with homes, rooftops, streets, parking lots. And on any typical day, even several days after a rainfall, you'd find water traveling down these flumes, crossing streets, creating rather hazardous driving conditions. And as the next slide illustrates, really the project was as much about replacing those man-made concrete channels as it was to serve the neighbors, the homeowners that lived on either side of those. So like I said earlier, we replaced about 390 meters of concrete channel in this project, and we'll sort of show how that was done. We also worked very closely with 12 different families that lived on either side of these channels. These channels, you know, as you know, kind of nice as maybe this sort of sunset in the winter looks, you know, living next to a canal, you know, as shown on the next slide, in other times, these channels posed a really terrible hazard in this neighborhood and other neighborhoods around. It really didn't take a very significant rainfall event to generate a tremendous amount of water. You could have a rainfall event where, you know, the type of event that's you know, typical, you know, 4 or 5 times a year. You know, I'll go back to the English system. Maybe just, you know, 1 to 2 inches of rain, and it would create a tremendous amount of flow and velocity and drive cars off the road downstream, right up to these large pipes that would then convey large amounts of water further downstream. So the neighborhood came to a point, and the city came to a point where they were, you know, ready to replace these channels with something different. There was damage to homes, damage to cars. So the city was, you know, committed to doing something significant. Now, as we'll see here in this slide, Prairie Village on the map is a relatively small suburban town. It's only about 16 square kilometers. And it has roughly 22,000 folks that live there. It's largely residential. It's a classic post-war suburb, as we'd say here in the States, developed pretty quickly after the Second World War, over probably no more than a 20-year period. Largely developed by just a few different development companies, building homes that at the time were very affordable, and ushered, you know, tremendous and very fast growth. These days, this is a pretty expensive community to buy real estate in. Even homes that, you know, maybe are, like I said earlier, 50 or 60 years old, sell pretty well. The folks who live in this neighborhood were reasonably affluent, had lots of opinions and lots of desire to make change. And that's what this project generally sought to do. Landworks in this project worked very closely with a civil engineering firm devoted to water resources and water management. And we worked very closely with the city of Prairie Village to take the steps to make these changes. You know, in general, I'll say about water, you know, humans have really a love-hate relationship with it. We're drawn to water as a species. You know, our favorite vacation spots tend to be by beaches or by lakes. But, you know, when we get a whole lot of water unexpectedly, we usually go bananas, and we get pretty scared. I mean, there, you know, stories as old as the Bible and other, you know, ancient tales before that speak of devastating floods. And so, you know, if there's water about that we don't like, as you'll see in the next slide, we find a way to get rid of it, and get rid of it fast. We bury it, we put it in pipes, we send it off of our landscapes as expediently as we can, so that we can do whatever we want with that property. And so, you know, as I said, with the city of Prairie Village, you know, only 16 square kilometers. They do not have a single natural stream corridor in that entire town. They have about 6 kilometers of concrete flumes, like, you know, what we are seeing here, and what this is an example of more of that sort of thing in Johnson County. Prairie Village isn't alone. There are other neighboring communities nearby. You'll regularly drive past these. And in, you know, reasonably calm storms, because it's such a large watershed, as you go further downstream, they become, you know, torrents. It's just a, you know, a problem created by overdevelopment, underdeveloped storm sewer systems, and really avoidance of this whole problem for decades and decades. So, you know, as landscape architects, we have a lot of tools that we often employ to try to, you know, manage stormwater in you know, with green solutions, using vegetation, using engineered soils to help infiltrate water, such as rain gardens or, you know, constructed wetlands. Even dry detention cells that are planted with native vegetation and under many conditions are dry, but, you know, help absorb and infiltrate stormwater when they get wet. We worked with our engineering partners on this project to really employ a little bit of all of that to try to come to a solution for this neighborhood. You know, again, as we see on this next slide, you had, you know, a concrete channel that provided no infiltration whatsoever for water. It was designed just to carry it and convey it, push it downstream. And it's just, you know, it's less than, you know, really a meter deep right there in the channel, and maybe only, you know, a couple meters at most below the elevation of some of these nearby homes on either side. You know, it's a channel that is maybe, you know, 3 meters wide. It's just a relatively small space. So we worked with the engineer, with the city, with our public partners to come up with a solution where we really dropped the depth of that channel and made it an open bottom channel, one that was not, you know, impervious concrete, but you know, a gradation of several different kinds of natural stone, to allow during small storm events for water to, you know, pass into there and relatively, you know, quickly infiltrate. But then above that, still below that existing concrete channel depth, we created a more broad shelf, really a much wider channel that had, you know, a width of, you know, something close to more like 9 meters, and the benches or the shelves on either side of the low channel would be planted with a variety of different vegetation to allow for not only infiltration of water, but also slowing that water velocity down a little bit, so that downstream the water wasn't coming at such a you know, crazy speed. And then, you know, again, once we get out of that shelf, we're still really in this, you know, I'd say, you know, 9 to 12 meter wide floodway that under really large storms is still capable of conveying this water. And so once you get up there, you're back to these neighbors' yards and their lawns and their various ornamental shrubs and trees, and that's where the project starts to become something a little bit more than stormwater management and stormwater design. This is an example of one of the planting plans. This is sort of the overall plan that we developed in conjunction with the civil engineer to, you know, break this project into all these various zones. And, you know, you can see here, you know, what I was talking about when I mentioned how there were these 12 different homeowners we started to work with. And really what, you know, this project was initiated before we were brought on by the city and our civil engineering partner, but they brought us on because they understood that it was really going to take a landscape architect to make a holistic project out of it. You know, we have a practice that embraces stream restoration. Over the years, we've done a number of projects that, you know, help civil engineers soften these projects. We do that with plants. We're good at plants. We're good at, you know, specifying plants that'll work in difficult situations. And we're also good at dealing with people and working with folks to give them some agency in a project like this. And so that's really where our job began. You know, so if we look at the next slide, we were brought on, you know, first and foremost to not only design you know, plans and specify plans for the situation, but to engage with the public. And that was invaluable to the success of the project. You know, keeping these homeowners informed of, the schedule of the project, whether it involved our design or not, whether it had to do with civil design, later on utility relocation, or construction timelines. That was hugely important to keeping folks, understanding of what was going on and calm. As you'll see, there's a tremendous amount of disturbance this project created in this neighborhood. And really our work helps soften the impact of that construction, both in kind of a metaphorical sense of just, being there to sort of, hold the hand of these neighbors, but also giving them something to look forward to in terms of the finished product, which was kind of the re-greening of their properties. And more than anything, this engagement just gives folks agency. It gives them power to interact with the project and know that they have, a role to play. So one of our first, I guess, missions in doing design was to focus on what sort of plants would be appropriate in what I call the shelf, that sort of bench that's just above the channel. There are a number of ways to go with that. We devised a number of different schemes for property owners to consider. But it took there were a lot of criteria to consider for this specific plant zone. We had to select plants that had a certain sort of roughness to them, something that would help slow water down and could withstand the force of sometimes fast-moving floodwaters. These were plants that were going to be in sun, any day where it was sunny, they were going to be fully exposed, and then other days they were going to be, inundated with water. These had to be plants that these homeowners would be comfortable taking care of once the project was done. This is their property, and it was something they would have to tend to. So that was a bit unique, and it had to be something that they found aesthetically pleasing. Something that they would want to look on. So we couldn't always go with a really robust mix of native stream vegetation, because some of these folks have no appetite for that sort of thing. This isn't really a wild space. It's very suburban. So once we started to get a feel from these neighbors what they would have an appetite for in that shelf, in that area right below the stream, in the next slide, we started to then talk to these folks about, well, this project's going to have a fair bit of disturbance. It's not just about replacing that concrete flume. It's about excavating and rebuilding, a channel that is about 12 meters wide, and in some places, ventured further up into their properties. And so, our second job after selecting these plants for that very fine-tuned stormwater function was to then help, mitigate the impact this project had beyond that. The city had a requirement that any tree that was disturbed by the project, and there were many, there were a good, 80 to 100 trees that were taken out by the project, would be replaced. And really, the project went eventually, much beyond that. So in the next slide, we have an example of a plan that we would have developed with one of the homeowners. We really ended up, going and working with each homeowner on an individual basis. This wasn't something we did in a public forum. This was really something where, I, along with maybe one of the city engineers and even one of the stormwater engineers, would just, make time with these folks and visit them at their house, sit on their back deck, months before the project began, to understand, here are the areas that are going to be impacted. What do you want to see? What can we do to make this again a backyard, a side yard that you're gonna look forward to spending time in? We did that in plan view, and then we also did for these folks images of every type of plant that was being considered. And it probably doesn't take much to look at this and realize, boy, those aren't necessarily native plants to Kansas. Some of these are, literally garden variety, pieces of landscape that folks throughout Kansas City and really throughout the Midwest, expect to see in their yards. We did, as much, native and naturalized landscaping as we could, but, it really varied homeowner to homeowner what they wanted to be able to see. And that was important. Being able to do both plan view and these sort of plan images gave folks a vision, gave them something to understand and look forward to really once the project began. And these meetings ended up really being personal, consultations. There were 12 different homeowners. We definitely spent time with each one of them. I think, maybe one of those necessitated no more than like a phone call. They didn't have a whole lot of needs, but others, we visited multiple times. I think there was one homeowner, we revised their plan 11 different times. I think in total, there were about 35 plans, or iterations of plans generated. And honestly, it was completely worth it because, at the end of the day, we had folks who were embracing the project and ready for the project. So, how did it turn out? We look at the next slide. Here's one last look at those concrete flumes that went through this neighborhood before the project began. It's a pretty neighborhood, and like I said, you see this sort of thing throughout Johnson County. When it was all done, this is the after shot of this same corridor, very different. Now, this is extremely close to when construction was still wrapping up, and you can see the natural channel there with the riprap, the rocks, the various gradations of rocks, and then those shelves. I think in these two instances, on either side, the landscape contractors had to come through, in many cases, months after all of this rock and soil had been moved, and then, puncture that erosion control blanket thousands of times to get these small plants to grow in there. But really the landscape up and out of that channel was also something that we had to design for these folks. It got built in relatively efficient fashion for a project like this. These infrastructure projects don't usually go quickly, but this one was done in about 12 or 15 months. I would say if we move to the next slide, the neighbors were generally happy with the finished result. This is an example here of, a small rainstorm, and that those channels fill up. And before, this was water that was, just just a meter or two below these folks's, garages or their basements. Construction, when it came to the plants themselves, went very smoothly. We had worked not only with neighbors, but also landscape contractors to source plants that we knew would be available. So there were very few substitutions during the construction period. So what did we learn? I think we just have a couple more slides left. I will say plant selection matters. Coming up with plants that would be reliable in these difficult conditions, but that people would still, embrace and want to maintain in their yards was huge. The personal engagement with neighbors was invaluable to the success of the project, not just the way it looks in the end, but how the neighbors and the neighborhood embrace the project. Flexibility was pretty critical, at least during the design process. We were fortunate to have the staff and the workload at the time that allowed us to do a whole lot of personal consultation in kind of a 3 to 4 month period. But I think, overall, Landworks likes to brag that a landscape architect in general, was critical on this project. To be able to create, a vegetation that really enhance the stormwater function of this channel, select the right vegetation for the right spaces, that also create aesthetic appeal for these folks living on either side, and build public support for a very expensive infrastructure project. So one that we were really grateful to be part of, and I'm glad to be able to speak about it with you all this evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to wrap up with our final case study this evening and share a little bit about Meadowbrook Park It's interesting, this is also located in Prairie Village. So you saw the aerial view and Brian explained how tightly compact and how small that area was. So that just explains how important this green space was to the community of Prairie Village and now has become very important to the county as well. As the landscape architect, we were selected by the county as the lead consultant, which this was our largest project that we had been selected to work on up to the point in time. This was in about 2015. We started doing the master planning. As the landscape architect, we were directing 5 phases of development. We had a conceptual master plan that we put together, including the public engagement, of course, the site analysis and that type of work. Once we started on the project, the county was hoping to be able to use a building that was on site, and that was not able to be the case. It wasn't feasible and or financially advantageous. So we had an architect that was working on a building at the same time under a separate contract that we put together. Some of the key infrastructure that was included, we had pedestrian bridges and trails. We had an environmental learning area on the south part of the property. There were shelters, pickleball courts where a swimming pool used to be, a sledding hill, a destination playground, and a variety of different other amenities for this community at large. The goal was really to create a destination park that was balancing recreation and education and a focus on sustainability as well. We wanted the ability to elevate the perception of landscape architecture in a community that was revitalizing to allow this green space and really be inclusive for all ages and for all abilities. So we were able to capture this piece of property because it was a golf course that had gone bankrupt. And this is an image of what the golf course looked like. You could see the sand trap no longer has any sand, but we were working with some really beautiful trees that were on the property. And the opportunity and the excitement to turn something that was private over to the public really was something everyone was very excited about. So it's interesting how this came about. It was a collaboration between private developers, the city of Prairie Village, and then the county who hired us. The developers were looking at creating this $200 million mixed-use community, and they were wanting to utilize the park setting to make this really a special place. Their plans included a boutique inn, some single-family homes, but with very small yards for maintenance purposes. There were some twin villas. There are a few multifamily units. There was a senior housing development, and then a small portion was retail. But this really was exciting because it was a rebirth for this community. What we learned through this process was there were a lot of people who had moved to Prairie Village, raised their kids, had their families, the kids had grown up, and they were still in the home that they no longer could maintain or wanted to maintain. So when it came online that an opportunity for these villas came up, people were very anxious to move out of those homes into a newer development. And what that did was free up these homes for new families to move in with kids. So this aging community, it really changed the demographics and the population that was in Prairie Village and added a more diverse population of people to this community. This was the final master plan graphic that was completed. You can see that where the golf clubhouse became the activity center at the top of this oval. And we really framed everything around this great lawn experience. The plan includes a destination playground area and a grand pavilion, all of that close to the parking area and the building just for functional purposes. The senior exercise area was further south, closer to the senior development that was happening. You can see the stream corridors or the creeks and the drainage ways that flank either side of that oval. And then as we move north, we've got pickleball courts. There was an old swimming pool that was part of this private club. that was no longer functioning, and some tennis courts, and we were able to turn that into some very active pickleball courts. And then as you move east across the property, it gets a little more natural, a little more native, a little less touched. We've got a sledding hill. We have more nature play opportunities. There's some sound play that we utilize instruments for, some sand play. And then the rest was really future phases that they were planning to get to. The trail network was one of the biggest things that was asked for in the public engagement, that was sought after, and that is highly used. So we do have several pedestrian bridges that were included, and we were sure to get the most network in the sidewalks and trails for the community. Here's a completed aerial photograph of what the park looks like. You can see those drainage ways. You can see the sledding hill on the left and the destination playground on the right. And then more the east property, you can see the more tucked away nature play area that exists. You can also see the fabulous trees that are on the property now that they were changing for the fall season here. And we did really work hard to ensure we inventoried every tree that was on the site and retained all of the trees that we could for this property. I would say I was an advocate for removing a few more than the client had an appetite to remove. Some were just past their life, and I knew once all of the new improvements were going to be implemented that they were going to stand out. But we kept them, and they were happy with that, and they're still alive to this day. The design really focused around this grand lawn. It was an opportunity for just open air activities, kite flying, festivals, that kind of space. And it really did provide the great visual from the clubhouse windows or the activity center windows all the way down the great lawn and then across the ponds that are on the south part of the property. I mentioned the activity center. It was designed as the threshold to the park. It really had a focus on sustainability. They had chosen to make a $4 million investment for this building once they were all in. It was really exciting because they have a day camp preschool that was included as part of this activity center. That was another thing that was much needed in this neighborhood that didn't exist. And they had determined that they were going to focus that day camp education and early childhood education on environmental and sustainability lessons. So they have a playground that's private for their facilities, but it's got sand tables and water tables and all kinds of other things to teach kids about natural systems. You can see here the building was complemented with a lot of native grasses. And this next image shows how we chose to use that planting plan to really reinforce both the arc of the grand lawn and also the angles that were very prevalent as part of the site and the building architecture and roof lines. As I mentioned, we surveyed all of the trees. We really did want to keep all that we could. Unfortunately, this beautiful cherry bark oak on the right was one that just couldn't work into the plans. And we had a lot of conversations with the client about utilizing or repurposing the wood because we knew that it was going to be high quality material. Using it for stepping stones, using it for play elements, making benches. But ultimately, in the end, they were able to repurpose this tree to a private individual, and I'm sure someone made some beautiful furniture out of the tree. Here's an example of the the creek plantings. We really didn't do a lot with the streams that were there. We made sure that we were shoring up any of the erosion control or the erosion that would happen in that creek, because when we received the property, the ponds required dredging. There was a lot of silt that had ended up in these ponds, and really created quite a conundrum early on in the project, because then it was our responsibility on the park to find a place to put that material that was dredged out of the ponds and use it in some fashion. We were able to do that, and I'll show you a picture of that here in just a minute. But the great thing about this Park and Recreation District is they have phenomenal staff. The staff, they have ecologists and they have maintenance personnel that really understand systems. So once this property came into their ownership, the creeks here and the drainage channels have really been treated well, and we don't anticipate that we're going to have any silting issues moving forward. Here are some images from different aspects of the park. We've had a hard time communicating because this park is so large and has so many different opportunities, really showing the overall activity that happens. So I've broken this into active and passive areas. You can see that the active activities, the pickleball courts are busy all hours of the day and night, every day. Weather is not a factor. And it's nice to see that there's so many taking ownership of the property. The bottom image is a senior fitness facility. Again, I mentioned it's close to the senior living center, and they can walk over, completely accessible, and access the workout equipment and spend time outdoors. You can see, if you look closely in the snowy picture, that's the sledding hill, and on snowy days, it is full. There are a lot of kids that use that, a lot of people that are out there using it, and that's fun to see. It's not an element that's included in a lot of our parks, so it is quite unusual, and people will travel to participate. So what was so challenging to us at the beginning, we were so frustrated that as landscape architects, they were going to dump this sludge on us, has really become quite a positive amenity for the park. I've got some images here of some of the sound play that happens in some of the quieter areas of the park. Then we have the destination playground that's located off the Grand Pavilion. And then I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this sand play area in the middle image. It was something that the client was very adamant that we provide, and we had the opportunity to make this accessible to anyone that would be in a wheelchair. So that cutout that you can see works so that a wheelchair can get underneath it, and anyone can reach in and play in the sand, and then other children can climb into it and they can play and interact together. And that really has been a nice feature to the park, and it is used. The planted area in between the sound play and the sand play became a perfect place to have a butterfly garden. So we've planted plant material specified and planted plant materials there that attract hummingbirds and butterflies, and the kids have the opportunity then to see the pollinators at work. Another active area on the project, this was actually a project that Brian was working on. It came later. As I mentioned, we phased the master plan and there were later phases. This happened to be on the east side of the park, and it came sooner than I actually thought that it would. But the county really wanted an all-inclusive playground. And Brian worked closely. We worked closely with the client and a collection of parents really interested in seeing what an inclusive playground could look like for their families. And so when we talk about inclusive play, especially in this one, we're not just looking at the children who have mobility issues, but we're also considering autism and ADHD and certain things that are needed for a variety of different challenges for kids. One of the most important things in an inclusive playground like this is, you can see in the background, the playground has a fence. And initially, as a landscape architect, you don't want to have a fence to keep people out or make it look like it's a barrier. But really, we've learned through the process that there are kids who have issues with darting, and parents are really concerned that their kids might take off. So the fence keeps them safe and keeps the parents more comfortable in spaces like this. We also made sure to include passive areas in the park with so much property and so much beautiful landscape. We were able to design here, work with our architect, and provide a grand pavilion, a place for picnics. You can see there's a gas-fueled fire pit there and some grills. There's a fireplace inside the grand pavilion, so it's really a nice place for families to gather. East of the park, we've got a wood fire-fired pit. The intention was that this would be for scouting troops or family reunions, to be able to come out and roast marshmallows and really have a camping experience, but within the urban environment. One of the exciting things for me, I love having the opportunity to work with and see artists really generate something that enhances any of the parks that we work in. And this was just recently completed in the last year or so. But our master plan showed areas where public art would be great if there was something interactive that would work within the park community. And Kansas is the sunflower state. So the artists, I think, took that and expanded it. And to our surprise, she found people that represented various communities, groups, who all had a part to play in the property in some form or function before it became a golf course. And it was amazing how many different groups of people and nationalities had all had a hand in the development of this park, and their story all gets told by the artist and the carvings inside this beautiful sunflower. And when it lights up at night, it's pretty spectacular. So of course, you might understand that the community was very interested in this, having limited access to public park space. And with the density of homes that were around this area, everybody wanted to understand what was happening and want to have a say in how these went. So this was not one of those times when we had a hard time getting people to come out and talk to us. We were fortunate. This was the old golf course clubhouse that was still standing on the property, so we were able to utilize that facility. People could look out the windows and see what the golf course might offer, and then review our plans and look to see what they liked about that. We also took time to make sure that people went outside and experienced the park itself. We had various stations set up around on the golf cart paths, so that families could take a walk and then kids could interact, look at the pictures, and explain what it is that they would like to see on the property. Pickleball was new at that time, fairly new, relatively new. So we set up a pickleball court on the asphalt, and we're able to allow people to see what the paddle and the ball would do, and be able to play a little bit, since that was one of the amenities that we had proposed. And we take all of the public input, and we're able to display it and demonstrate it in a variety of ways. So we utilize websites a lot of the times. As Erica had mentioned, Overland Park keeps a good one. All of these agencies typically are managing websites that they communicate back out, so that those who participate in our engagement know that we listened, that they were heard, and that their feedback really mattered. So if you're familiar with a Wordle, the more times the word is said, the larger the word becomes, and you can see that connectivity, the sidewalks, the paths, that was something that was really important. And then just a place for the community to gather. Another part of the engagement was the destination playground. The county received proposals from a variety of playground representatives, and they put together proposals, and the county took them to a swimming pool on a hot summer day and asked the kids and the parents who were there to select the playground that they liked the best. And that's the playground that you see here. This is the one that the community had selected, and then they got to see it implemented and have the opportunity to play. It is an impressive playground. The tower is taller than it looks, and I can't really go anywhere without having someone say, my kids love this place. We spend a lot of time at Meadowbrook Park, and I largely because of the open space and the playground. Erica also mentioned the groundbreaking. This is another one of those public engagement opportunities. Our agencies here love to turn up a little bit of dirt, paint some shovels gold, give the politicians the hard hats, and allow the photo opportunity. And so they always take advantage of that. We did that on this park as well. And then the last opportunity is the ribbon cutting. When the park is open to the public, our agencies usually have a lot of fun things to hand out. A few words are spoken. They have giant scissors and a big ribbon, and they cut the ribbon and everybody cheers. So Meadowbrook was no exception. So then lastly, I just want to end with the value, this public-private partnership. The project wouldn't have happened without them. The collaborative development and the collaborative work that the design team had with the agency and with each other really created this special place. And as we were looking back on some numbers, now that it's been several years that it's been installed and people have had the opportunity to experience it, this park impacts over 900,000 people every year. And so when we stop and think about that opportunity, that privilege, this park is not only good for the economy, but really, we just love the smiles and the memories that we know that we're making and that are being created every day in this park space. So with that, we can open it up to any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carisa, Erica, and Brian. It's really impressive the work you do in landworks, and also it shows us the scope of work of a landscape architecture studio. That it's really very interesting. Also, the way you approach to the projects. Something that is very important that you have mentioned is this. Working with the communities, and yeah, I like what you said about listening to the community, and also to let them understand the design the way the designers do, and I think at the end it's a conjunction of this learning from the community and also trying or working with the community to also let them learn what design is and the purpose of the design. So that's a really very interesting approach. And also it's really interesting the project about working with water. Sometimes we just think landscape architecture is plants, but no, we are working with nature, as we know. Ian McHarg said, we work with nature, and it's very interesting because we keep still in the world when we talk about water and infrastructure, and mainly engineers think about tubes or concrete canals, and so it's a different way to start approaching these matters, because also in one hand side we say in the world we need water, we have lack of water, but in the other hand side it becomes a problem. Not because water is a problem, it's because we have caused that problem the way we are designing the towns, the villages, the urban spaces. So it's also, when we are talking about green solutions, it's just to take a look to nature and how it works, and to learn about that. So it's really very interesting. Thank you very much. We will go now to, I have some questions for you, and we will go now a little bit slower because we want to do this interaction bilingual. So I will ask one of our students, Diego, to help us with this. So one of the questions, first question to you is this engagement, very interesting engagement with public, with the community. As designers, this process means a lot of learning from both sides. But you, as designers, what is at the end of this process, like what you get from this, and the satisfaction of doing this? Because sometimes designers, we are like, have our ideas, and in some cases we don't want to go out of that idea. But it's really interesting to know what you get from those experiences, and from that what you give to the community in the design. So Diego, can you help me to translate this question to Spanish?
¿Me escucha?
Sí.
¿Quiere que traduzca al español lo que acaba de decir usted?
Sí, rápidamente.
Bueno, lo que la maestra Mónica quiere decir es qué es lo que obtiene el arquitecto como diseñador al recibir toda esta retroalimentación por parte de la comunidad. O sea, además de satisfacción, ¿qué otros atributos se reciben, se perciben?
Sí, gracias. Okay, go ahead, please.
Well, I will start, and Erica and Brian, feel free to share your experiences as well. Do I need to wait? No, okay. I didn't. There's a lot of give and take in the public engagement, and we have a lot of conversations in our office too about some of the things that we hear from the public, and we understand that might not be in their best interest, and we use it as an opportunity to educate if there is something that is not going to be beneficial for the whole group that is providing feedback. I think oftentimes, we've participated where we have activities, and we've had facilitators that ask the public to design their park. And I have a lot of heartburn with that because we are the experts, right? We're the professionals. But we learn a lot too when we hear what matters to people. So there's a lot of give and take, I would say.
Lo que dice la arquitecta Carisa es que se toma y se dejan algunas cosas. Quiere decir que hay que discernir entre la información que nos dan como retroalimentación, porque a veces algunas opiniones solo van a beneficiar a un grupo de esa población. Entonces ella dice que hay que saber diferenciar entre lo que va a beneficiar al grupo completo, pero que entre cada experiencia se aprende algo nuevo y se aportan ideas que quizás no se habían considerado.
Gracias. I go to the next one. We are talking now about sustainability, and that represents another way of how we select plant materials. And are people, in your experience, because I would say you're some steps ahead from other places where we do landscape architecture, but are people understanding this change of idea of changing from like the French garden images to this new use of plant materials, of talking more about native plants or seasonal plants?
I think the average, consumer of landscape, like in my project, homeowners are slow to pick up on that, because that it's just a tradition that doesn't always translate as easily to small, yard by yard, property by property scales. It's easier to convey the beauty of that type of landscape in a larger space oftentimes. So I think that our office is fortunate that a lot of our work is with public agencies, because public agencies, whether they're designing a park or whether they're designing, a new public health, office or medical clinic, or even, a maintenance facility for vehicles and equipment, they're willing to install landscapes like that, if only to educate the public and let them see how those types of more modern landscapes can look. So it's sometimes rewarding working for public agencies that are willing to take that chance in efforts that, the masses will better appreciate it.
La pregunta de la maestra Mónica es cómo hacer entender al público que el jardín tradicional ha ido evolucionando y que hay nuevas maneras de abordar estos temas. Y la respuesta del arquitecto Brian es que a escalas menores es difícil explicarle al individuo al individuo en un jardín pequeño cómo es que estos jardines han ido evolucionando. Pero es gracias a estas obras públicas como hospitales y escuelas donde se les da mayor libertad, que ellos pueden proponer ideas nuevas y enseñarle al público cómo han ido evolucionando esos jardines.
Gracias. Yeah, thank you for the answer. And also talking about plants, and for us it's nice to see other examples in other places, because you, for example, as you presented, Carisa, in the first part of the presentation, that where you are located and how are the hard-zone conditions, the weather is completely different. You have the seasons very established, and you were able to see here in Mexico that everything is green everywhere at every time. So, yeah, it's something I think that gives you as landscape architects a different way of designing, because you have to design for probably two seasons, or 3 or 4, I don't know. We have all this seasonality very clear in the place where you are. So that's also very interesting on how you select. I think it's a challenge. Just let me get the translation of what I said to the public, and then I said my final question, and we go to questions and answers from the public.
Bueno, entre este contraste que hay entre el diseño que se hace en México para una estación que predomina a lo largo del año, cómo abordan ellos un diseño que tiene que abarcar 4 estaciones que son muy marcadas en los Estados Unidos.
Yeah, so just how do you, I probably would say for you it's easy to think about how do you design for 4 seasons, but for us that we design for 1, I think, can you just explain us how this comes to your mind when you are thinking about that on your design?
Was that a question, Monica? I may have missed it.
Your question about seasonality?
Mhm.
It's a lot of fun to try to think through, at least from a plant standpoint, how a space is going to look, in the dead of winter versus the heat of summer. We live in a kind of a challenging part of the United States for that. When you're this far away from water, the temperatures can vary. You can have days where the temperature changes 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and seasons where it's even more so. I don't know. We all have a batch of plants that we know look amazing in the winter, even without leaves. And other plants that we think of because of their bloom cycle and what's going to look really great in the month of May versus the month of July versus the month of September.
No, it really requires us to understand the plant because, as Brian said, a plant that we like in the summer with the leaves, if it has really red stems, it looks fabulous against the winter snow. So a lot of the native grasses that we showed, and especially at Meadowbrook Park, the seed heads make it look totally different in the fall season. And then if we leave that to overwinter, the brown stems and the seed heads are a different look than when the grasses are green. So it makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was just going to add that although it is challenging where we live, it's also really fun and exciting to actually have 4 seasons, compared to the northern states or the southern states. They don't always get to experience that.
Thank you.
El Medio Oeste, al tener una temporalidad muy marcada y 4 estaciones completamente distintas, dicen ellos que es un poco complicado el pensar en el diseño, pero que ellos ya tienen bien estudiadas una planta vegetal que saben que durante la temporada de calor va a tener ciertas hojas, ciertos colores, y que esa misma planta, al perder sus hojas durante el otoño y el invierno, va a ir tornando sus colores, y en el invierno, al cubrirse de nieve, da otra imagen. Entonces ellos dicen que con estas plantas se aseguran de que durante las 4 estaciones van a crear estos 4 distintos escenarios que van a ser agradables para el usuario.
Gracias. Okay, so we go now to the questions from the public. Tengo aquí unas preguntas en el chat, pero quisieran del grupo participar, hacer alguna pregunta. Abrir micrófono para hacer alguna pregunta. Rodrigo.
Yo la puedo hacer directa, la escribí en el chat, pero como quieras, puedo esperar. ¿Sí?
Adelante.
Hello, and thank you very much. Everything is very interesting and very diverse, the several projects that you worked on. And I'd like to know about maintenance, especially on the public parks. Do you, from the beginning, have like a kind of educational program or guidelines for the community? Or how do you and make people maintain their new park?
That's a great question. And oftentimes agencies, if they don't have maintenance staff who understand the new changes, we do provide maintenance manuals, or we requested to have a maintenance manual that will explain what needs to happen in each of the seasons for the maintenance crews to be able to provide the experience that we're looking for in our designs. There are times in projects when we include the maintenance folks involved they're involved in the early stages in that conceptual planning as well, so they have input and understand what the decisions that are being made, why they're being made, and then how they need to adapt to it.
Thank you. And do they involve like in groups or so, or they are really not interested?
The maintenance personnel, are they?
I mean the community.
Are
Are
they?
there, yeah, like they organize groups that work with the maintenance groups that are already professionals, or they don't exist such programs, like opportunities for the community to engage to maintain the park.
Well, Erica, I know you may have more experience with that. I guess I would say oftentimes there are groups that get started and are excited about it, but then really don't follow through. So agencies aren't overly excited to have volunteer groups participate or the community participate. Sometimes there are certain portions of the park where master gardeners or something like that might contribute, or a downtown streetscape. We've had master gardeners work on those as well, but it's not very common.
Okay, thank you very much. I was wondering that
Thank-
maybe schools could get involved, so they begin learning about their environmental parks, and well, just like an idea that came to me right now. Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Comento yo rápido la respuesta. Bueno, en relación al mantenimiento, nos comenta el equipo que trabajan, suelen preparar guías, se trabaja para que se tenga un plan de mantenimiento en los sitios, y para que pues se logre contar con el conocimiento para poder realizarlo. No sé si me faltó algo más, digo.
Dijo que ellos proveen los manuales
Ujú.
en ciertos casos, y en otros casos ellos tienen personas capacitadas que mandan al sitio para que entrenen al personal ya existente. Eso fue lo que...
Perfecto. Muchas gracias. We have another question here. Rodrigo, creo que habías levantado la mano. Sí.
Sí, gracias. I have a question, especially for Carisa. As a biologist, I would like to keep all the trees on the site. I have to modify. I would like to keep all the plants because I become very attached to them, especially if they're native plants. So when you encounter this situation, like what you mentioned with the tree, I think it was an elm, that you had to remove. So the question here is, what are the main criteria to decide to remove or keep a tree on a site? Because the only reason I can think of, it's because it's sick. But what other reasons have you encountered, or you guys have encountered in your jobs?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I guess I would offer that some of it is experience. I've seen if we work extensively to preserve a tree, that then the construction may damage or not lend it to be an asset to the site. It's easier to remove it at the beginning of the construction versus waiting until the project is complete and then have to come back and remove it. But there are criteria. We can look at trees and see if half of it is dead, the other half is leafed out. It's probably nearing the end of its life in some form or fashion. We also look at the structure of the tree sometimes because we're designing these places for the public, and so we want to make sure that they're safe. And we do have storms here where giant limbs will break and fall, and so that's another consideration if we feel like that might be a threat to the public on our projects.
Eh, Ella dice que para algunos proyectos es simplemente más fácil removerlos, dependiendo del ciclo de vida en el que se encuentra el árbol. Si se encuentra cerca de su fase final, vale la pena mejor removerlo de una vez y evitar futuros problemas. También evaluando la estructura del árbol, para ellos garantizar la seguridad de los usuarios. Si un árbol se ve que, bueno, es que aquí en las condiciones del clima en el medio oeste son impredecibles y hay vientos muy fuertes, siempre hay que considerar la seguridad del usuario. Entonces, es muy común que los árboles se caigan y si ellos ven que la estructura del árbol no es muy firme, prefieren removerlo para evitar algún accidente o cosas así.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you. I have one question here from YouTube. Jaime Gonzalez is asking, was the plant palette selected, I don't know, for one of the projects, because he's not clear, was the plant palette selected based on aesthetic or sustainable criteria? What plants are native to the region? I think it depends on the project. But in general, how you are working with the plants, and as it says here, is now your criteria aesthetic or sustainable or both? I think both.
Yes, I would say both. I think the other two projects had more discussion on the plant materials, but I know specifically the projects or the plant materials on the Meadow project around the activity center. We had a lot of different, we had switchgrass and little blue stem. We had prairie drop seed. We had some tick seed. We had some coneflower. I don't know if these are all similar to what you might have. They're natives, and they're beautiful. So they're sustainable and they were beautiful. They met both criteria.
Thank you. La respuesta a esta pregunta de si la seleccionan por el criterio estético o sustentabilidad, pues es los dos. Buscando siempre, bueno, la posibilidad de usar plantas nativas, pero la selección va de la mano. There's another question here. Do you consistently seek community feedback for all of your projects? If so, how do you incorporate that feedback into your future designs?
I'd say that community feedback is important in, probably 80 to 90% of our projects. We do have some projects that are, private in the sense that maybe it's a retail business that we're, designing around, or, a residential project, not necessarily just a single home, but maybe a multi-family and apartment complex project. And those projects rarely seek out or are required to seek out public engagement, public comment. But otherwise, most of our projects incorporate feedback, and it's like we said, it makes the project better. Do we incorporate that feedback into future designs? We do learn from what we hear from project to project, but each project's different. So, and tastes and desires evolve as conditions in our world or in a neighborhood change. So you got to keep listening.
Yeah, I would just add that in some of the communities that we work in that we're not familiar with, their feedback is important because they really are the experts in their community. So like Brian said, we do learn a lot from what we hear.
Ellos dicen que en el 90% de los casos, como se dedican a proyectos comunitarios, pues sí es importante escuchar lo que la comunidad tiene que decir, porque ellos son los expertos en el sitio. Para el otro 10%, que son edificios o proyectos para el sector privado, por lo general ellos tienen mayor libertad o tienen un diseño ya preestablecido en el que realmente no buscan satisfacer a la comunidad y no toman realmente en cuenta las necesidades de la gente. Pero sí, en los proyectos comunitarios, el escuchar a la comunidad es uno de los pasos más importantes.
Gracias. From the group, from Carlos, he says, thanks a lot, you, Carisa, Erica, and Brian, for sharing your projects, your perspectives. And his question is about the water management project. He's asking why some of the trees that were along the canal were removed.
Obviously, that project involved a tremendous amount of excavation and earth moving, not only to lower and widen the channel for water management, but also to relocate certain buried utilities that were already there in the way. I mean, a lot of sanitary sewer pipes and natural gas pipes and other buried utilities got moved. So there's just a tremendous amount of disturbance, and there, because those neighborhoods had grown up that way for 50 or 60 years, there were a lot of trees in there, and yeah, they had to be removed, and we generally replaced them all.
Thank you. Yes, en relación a la pregunta es sobre el proyecto de manejo de agua en los canales, y la pregunta era, ¿por qué se tuvieron que remover ciertos árboles? ¿Podrías traducir la respuesta, Diego?
Sí. Dijo que, bueno, finalizó diciendo que estos vecindarios tienen entre 50 y 60 años de antigüedad. Entonces, en eso entonces no había tanta infraestructura como lo hay hoy en día, y se habían plantado árboles en muchas partes donde ahora ellos querían hacer excavaciones para ampliar un poco los canales y asimismo meter mayor infraestructura de agua, gas y electricidad, ya que en los Estados Unidos todos esos servicios se hacen de manera subterránea. Bueno, la infraestructura se hace de manera subterránea, entonces dijeron que era necesario removerlos, algunos se pudieron replantar, y otros más tuvieron que pues básicamente traer nuevos árboles y para compensar esa pérdida.
Gracias. Isaac.
Buenas noches. Primero, gracias a los exponentes. Quisiera preguntarles, ellos en base a sus proyectos que han hecho, ¿qué es lo mínimo que podrían sugerir para México, ya que no se asignan muchos recursos para estos proyectos? Pero ellos diciendo, bueno, pues si hay pocos recursos, ¿qué sería lo que haría inmediato o básico?
Yeah, the question is that first, thanking also to you for your great presentation, and he's asking, with your experience and what you have been talking about, working in some cases with low resources, which will be your suggestion? What will be your suggestion to Mexico, that we always are with very low resources? What could be the basic to consider to be able to develop a project with very few resources? Good question.
I think the magic word up here for projects that are big in terms of their vision, but small from funding is partnerships. Public agencies are always trying to find ways to partner with private entities to increase funding, or sometimes neighborhood organizations have an easier time raising funds for a project through sort of private sources and grants than sometimes a city or a county is able to. Meadowbrook Park that Carissa talked about itself was a partnership, between a county park district, a city, and a private developer, where, they took this 120-acre golf course and sold off parts of it, and raised money by, those real estate sales to then be able to pour some of that money back into the park. Partnerships are a lot of times the way these large projects come about.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Para proyectos que pueden ser muy grandes para el presupuesto con el que se cuentan, ellos dijeron que la palabra clave son las alianzas o asociaciones, es decir, buscar patrocinios, ya sea mediante programas, ya sea federales o estatales con el gobierno, o también en el sector privado. El proyecto de Meadow, no recuerdo el nombre, que incluía secciones de golf, fue una asociación entre el condado y una empresa privada que se benefició de estas secciones de golf, y fueron los que dieron gran parte de los fondos, ya que al crear estas secciones de golf, ellos le dan un nuevo valor a la tierra y pues pueden venderlo, y ahí es como obtienen su ganancia de vuelta.
Muchas gracias. And there is a last question here from the public that is in the YouTube transmission. Carla Telles, she's asking, what do you, as professionals in the United States, consider to be the main challenge for countries in Latin America for the full development of landscape projects in societies where perhaps it is not essential?
I think that's been a challenge from day one, and probably will continue to be a challenge, is demonstrating our value to other communities and municipalities and professionals, because they can see the value in architecture or infrastructure and engineering, but sometimes you really need to teach them that landscape architecture is beneficial. It's more than just pretty plants. So really educating everyone and continuing to educate everyone just how important our profession is.
I will add to that, some of the agencies that we work with now are starting to keep track of the number of visitors, like Meadowbrook, for example. I was surprised to know that information was captured. So I think municipalities are trying to educate the public as well, how many people and what kind of an impact that their spaces have. The agency that worked on Meadowbrook is now working on a tool that will put in metrics for how valuable green spaces are to people, and I'm anxious to see what kind of an impact that might have on the future.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question about
Cecilia.
sí, no, perdón.
Cecilia. Diego, can you
La voy a escribir mejor.
Para responder la pregunta, ellos dicen que es importante educar al público y hacerles ver que la arquitectura del paisaje tiene el mismo valor que tiene la ingeniería o la arquitectura convencional. Y mencionó algo sobre que el proyecto de Meadowbrook se le están tomando datos de la cantidad de gente que visita y el impacto quizás económico que pueda tener este flujo de gente, y que pues para cualquier proyecto se debería de hacer lo mismo, educar a la gente y enseñarles que pues la arquitectura de paisaje tiene su valor.
Bien, muchas gracias. Pues creo que aquí terminamos con las preguntas. I think we are here over with the questions. ¿Hay alguna más? Is there another question? Okay, so I want to thank you a lot for this wonderful presentation, for sharing with us these great projects and also this experience, because sometimes we just look at the images in the final magazine, for example, but there's a lot of work, there's a big process, there's a lot to do working with people, with the client, with the community, with the governments, educating, because it's part of what we do all the time. But it's fantastic when you see the results, and also congratulations. It's fantastic that you are celebrating 25 years as a studio, as an office. So thank you very much for being with us, for sharing with us. And this is you are always welcome. This is your house. This university is your house. You are always welcome. And it would be fantastic in some moment if we can have with you with us again. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Quiero agradecer. ¿Sí? Go ahead, Carisa.
Muchas gracias.
Quiero agradecer a todos nuestros asistentes en esta conversación, en esta conferencia el día de hoy, quienes se encuentran en YouTube. Que agradezco a los conferencistas esta oportunidad, pues, de conocer su trabajo, de toda esta experiencia adquirida, de además estar celebrando 25 años como despacho, de pues todo este proceso que realizan, porque les comentaba yo que muchas veces solamente vemos ya las fotos finales de un proyecto desarrollado, que además estos proyectos toman su tiempo para establecerse, y pues lleva todo un proceso, como ya nos lo están contando, como lo presentaron, y que pues es también muy interesante ver cómo sucede. Entonces agradecemos mucho el estar aquí con nosotros, agradecemos mucho estar en esta conferencia y su participación, y pues los invitamos de nueva cuenta en una próxima conferencia, pues no solamente de este diplomado, sino de las diferentes que se realizan como parte de las actividades de la División de Educación Continua y Actualización Docente de esta Facultad de Arquitectura. Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you, everybody.